Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second homegrown research webinar for 2024 here. Today, we are going to be talking about alternative cropping research. My name is Allie Noble, and I'm the Crops Extension Specialist out of the Prince Albert Regional Office here with Saskatchewan Agriculture, and I'm going to be chairing today's event. Usually I'm in the background, so it's nice to be in front of the camera today. Just a couple of heads up, CEUs are being offered for certified crop advisors on this webinar. To get that credit, you're going to need to attend the entire live event, and then there's going to be a QR code at the end of the presentations to collect your credit. If you miss that code and have attended live, just email us afterwards, and we're going to work with you to just make sure your credit gets sent into Prairie CCA there too. Before we start the formal presentation, I'm just going to go through a couple slides introducing our homegrown research webinar series. So right here on our first slide, you can see lots of logos. And why are we calling this the Homegrown Research Series? That's because all of the research presented here today and on the upcoming webinars is from research sites that are involved in the Agri-ARM network that's across Saskatchewan. So all the local research is able to be directly applied on your farm, as you can actually relate to the climatic conditions here too. So what is Agri-ARM? Agri-ARM is a network of producer-driven, directed applied research and demonstration organizations located across Saskatchewan. All of these are operating individually as sites. They strive to collaborate on a broad range of projects, generating results that are relevant to growers over a wide area. The Agri-ARM sites receive funding through the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture, as well as project-based funding from governments, commodity groups, and private industry too. So what do these Agri-ARM sites do, and why does it benefit Saskatchewan producers? Agri-ARM is that one-stop shop for research, demonstration, and extension activities across Saskatchewan. They provide reliable results across a wide range of soil and climatic conditions that create data that is relevant to local farms. It's comprehensive research support for adoption of new technologies, and they also support for development and validation of those technologies as well. So the results from these you can actually apply to on farm because it's super similar climatic conditions and it's maybe in the same soil zone as you. So we definitely encourage you to go and check out their website. They have a nice website there, and it has info on upcoming events, current projects, fact sheets, and research updates as well. They're also very focused on getting producer ideas and making sure that they're hitting the needs of the producers in their region. So if you're interested, they're always looking for new ideas and getting feedback. So on their website, you can actually share your idea via the idea submission, but you're also welcome to reach out to your local Agri-ARM site and talk with a manager there with some of your potential ideas for research or some of the issues you run into on your farm that they could potentially create some research projects on. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to your local Agri-ARM sites. You can find all their contact information here on their website. So we have 8 sites across the province. There was a map on a couple of those last slides, so you can actually see which one is closest to you. The other thing to keep in mind is that sites often have field days. So for 2024, you can check out all the field days at the different sites on this slide here. They're also going to have information on their own social media and websites. So definitely contact your local Agri-ARM for more details to see some of the research they're giving. In the next few slides here, I'm just kind of going to go over some of the speakers that we have here today and which sites they're from. So first off, we're going to have Zoe Galbraith from the Conservation Learning Center. This one is near and dear to my heart because they're the site closest to me and I get to go out there often and work with the gals. The CLC was established in 1993 under the Parkland Agriculture Research Initiative, which was a component of the Green Plan. So the CLC does not only do annual cropping research, but they also have some horticulture research they do. Each year, the site also has a lot of students going through with their school programs. I think it was about 1,700 last year. And then something to keep an eye out for at this site is they actually just put in a tile drainage project this last year. And so if you want to come out to their field day, you can check out that tile drainage in action. Also speaking today, we have Lana Shaw, the research manager with the Southeast Research Farm in Redver, Saskatchewan, so down in the far east corner of the province. Diversification, sustainability, and profitability are the keys to research and demonstration priorities at SURF, and that shines through in the research projects you can see come out of their farm. They were originally founded in 1997. The next speaker we have here is Gursahib Singh, who is joining us from the Irrigation Crop Diversification Corporation located in Outlook, Saskatchewan. So we call it ICDC for short. They were originally established in 1996 by the Irrigation Act. They conduct field demonstrations with producer cooperators across Saskatchewan to field test ideas that come from irrigators, industry, research, and they work with the Canada Saskatchewan Irrigation Diversification Centre, so CSIDC, and other sources. So they do a lot of collaborating at that site, and it's nice because it's the one site we know is always going to get moisture. Lastly, our final speaker here today is Brian Nybo from the Wheatland Conservation Area located in Swift Current. So the WCA was originally established in 1983 by producers concerned about soil degradation with a special emphasis on soil salinity. They take a proactive approach to member concerns and have adjusted programs and mandates to include applied research and demonstration of advanced cropping systems. So our crop specialist team has the pleasure of working with these Agri-ARM sites throughout the year, but one of the pieces we always do with them is we rotate crop diagnostic school to each of the different sites. So this is just a save the date, mentioning that crop diagnostic school is going to be hosted at NARF, so the site around Melfort this year, on July 24th and 25th. So just keep an eye out on our social media pages for registration details in the upcoming months. So along with this information, we have a couple additional resources for everyone under our handout sections in the chat box on the side there. The resources will be shared along with the recording after the webinar is complete. Today, we're going to have 15-minute presentations from each speaker, followed by a question panel with all the speakers. So save all your questions. You can pop them into the question chat bar on the side there. Today's presentation is being recorded, and those recording links will be sent out later in the week in a follow-up email here. And as well, at the very end of the presentation, there's going to be an evaluation that pops up. So when you see that pop up, please fill that out. We definitely look at those, take those into account when we're looking at topics for next year. And also it's a way to help us prioritize research needs for the future. So we have a couple last housekeeping notes to keep in mind. As I mentioned, if anybody has any questions during any of the presentations, you can type those into the question box on the bottom right-hand side of your control panel. Your question will remain anonymous and is only going to be sent to me. During the presentation, everybody is going to be muted so that we can ensure that there's no feedback that's going to interfere with that audio either. So with that, we're going to get started with our first presenter here today. So to start off the day, we have a presentation from Zoe Galbraith, who is the acting manager at the Conservation Learning Center. Zoe started at the Conservation Learning Center in 2020, so I'm going to pass it over to Zoe at this point.
Awesome, thanks, Allie. So yeah, let's jump right in here talking about cover cropping experiences in the Prince Albert region. So rather than focus in on a single project, today I kind of want to give you the key highlights from a couple of different projects that we've done on cover cropping in the last few years. So I'm going to touch on a few topics relevant to cover cropping, including single species compared to mixtures, timing of seeding, some issues that we've encountered in our area, and what we've done to overcome those. First off here, I want to talk about a single species cover crop demonstration we just did in 2023. This one was also done in Redverse and Swift Current. I'm going to focus on Prince Albert for today, but the research report is available and it'll have the results from the other sites if you're interested. So for this one, we wanted to really showcase how these different crops perform when grown individually in different regions of the province to get a really good picture of their performance in Saskatchewan. And we also wanted to feature a really wide variety of crops too. So we've got some broadleaves, some grasses, cool and warm season, and annual and perennial species in this demo. And for this demonstration, we didn't apply any fertilizer as well. Jumping into our results from Prince Albert in 2023, so the table on the left represents the cover crop biomass in wet weight. The table on the right represents the cover crop's weed competitiveness. So kind of unsurprising, but our overall conclusion here is the cover crops that produce the highest biomass also tended to have the best weed competitiveness. And I will give you a closer look at some of these cover crops in the next slides. I know that sorghum Sudan grass is generally also a cover crop of interest here, and it did perform fairly well for us, especially considering we didn't have that much moisture in 2023 and we didn't apply fertilizer with it. But looking more closely here, so all of these crops were seeded in early June, and these pictures I'm showing you are from August 15th. So on the left here, we have Phacelia. Now this one was a great pollinator crop. It produced a lot of blooms. Definitely something to consider with this one though is it definitely set seed. So if you're not wanting a crop to be reseeded, you have to really keep an eye on this one. It produced great biomass though. Now in the center here we have tillage radish. Typically tillage radish would be planted more as a shoulder season cover crop, so not in early June, but for ease of logistics for this demo, we planted it with everything else. And so you can see it has bolted in this picture here, but regardless, it produced some great biomass and had excellent root growth as well. And the purple top turnip is the picture on the far right. This one as well had excellent root growth, not quite as much above ground biomass, but you can still see it had great soil coverage. You're not seeing any bare soil through that canopy there. Next three I want to show you are the borage. So the far left is the borage. It also is a great pollinator crop, but also be aware of that potential for reseeding with this one as well. And the borage, interestingly, was actually our top biomass producer in Prince Albert in 2023. Looking at the center photo here, this is cerise proso millet. This millet grass did really well for us in 2023. It was nice and tall. It did start heading out, as you can see, but the seed didn't mature prior to termination, so we didn't have to worry about that. And then another millet grass that did well for us was the German golden millet on the right. And this one, again, was nice and tall, and we didn't have to worry about seed set with that one. Another fun component to this trial, we were able to terminate it however we liked, so we chose to go over it with a roller crimper. So if you're not familiar with a roller crimper, I have a picture of it mounted on a tractor on the left, and it's a cylindrical drum that has chevron-shaped blades on it. And basically the idea is to terminate the plants by bending them over and snapping the stem, but leaving them anchored to the soil so that they stay in place as a weed suppressing mulch. And so because it wasn't a specific component of the trial, I will say like we weren't making sure that each crop was at the ideal stage or that we were fine tuning the settings or anything like that. It was just for fun, but still it was interesting to see on the far right, the Phacelia was completely terminated by the roller crimper. It was very effective. Not all crops were completely terminated. In fact, most of them did bounce back after the roller crimper pass to some degree. For example, this crimson clover I have pictured in the center, it was flattened a little bit, but it popped right back up in no time. So roller crimping can be effective if you're at the right stage and fine-tuning your settings, but important to consider that different crops have different growth characteristics that might make them unsuitable for crimping. Now, I mentioned tillage radish in that last demonstration. We also had a separate tillage radish demonstration on site in 2023 where we did plant it in late summer as intended to showcase it as a shoulder season cover crop. So we had a few different treatments here looking at different methods of seed bed preparation. So whether we direct seeded into the tillage radish residue or cultivated it prior to seeding. And we also applied with or without fertility, and with or without applied herbicides. Now, fall of 2022, not long after seeding the tillage radish, we were really quite pleased with its performance. It established really rapidly, it had great soil coverage, and had some nice long tubers as pictured on the right there. So it could also be an interesting crop to explore on your operations for compaction as well. Now, we were hoping to see in early spring some weed suppression from the tillage radish residue, but as you can see on April 14th in that far left picture, the snow has barely melted and the tillage radish is completely broken down. And looking ahead on May 3rd, that center picture there, the tillage radish is totally gone and those first green weeds are just starting to pop up. So it wasn't that early spring weed suppression mulch that we were hoping for. However, we did notice something interesting later on May 17th. So you can see these bright green weedy strips here, and we realized that actually corresponds to the gaps between our plots. So while the tillage radish wasn't acting as that early spring weed suppressor that we were hoping for, it's evident that it did provide some benefit in the fall, reducing the winter annuals that we then saw the next spring. So for this one, we saw our biggest yield benefit when using all of our strategies combined. So planting our tillage radish cover crop, using crop tillage, applying fertility, and applying a pre-seed herbicide. But I will also note, as you can see from the picture, this area has been a problem area for weed pressure for us for a while. And so the crop tillage more likely was a benefit from the added weed control effort, and it wasn't required for the seedbed preparation, because as we can see from these pictures, the tillage radish residue presented no problems for direct seeding in the spring. Final one I want to touch on for today is a cover crop seeding demonstration we completed a couple of years ago. So this one, we were fortunate to be able to conduct it on certified organic land near us in Prince Albert, and we seeded at 2 different dates. So looking at an end of June and a mid-July seeding date. Year 1, we focused on cover crop establishment, and so we seeded a few different grasses, including forage oats and sorghum Sudan grass. We also seeded some silage peas, and then a couple combinations of the grass and silage pea. In year 2, we direct seeded a cash crop into the residue. So we were hoping to get a picture of how these different cover crops and blends performed as weed suppression mulch at different seeding dates, and also how they might impact cash crop yields in the following growing season. Looking at our first year for establishment, we saw a fairly big impact of seeding date for some of the cover crops. And so our table here represents the cover crop biomass in wet weight, and the yellow bars on the left are the crops that were seeded on June 30th. The orange bars on the right are the crops that were seeded on July 16th, so just a couple of weeks later. And so our sorghum Sudan grass seemed to be quite sensitive to seeding date. As you can see here, it was both our highest performing and our poorest performing cover crop, depending on the seeding date. So yeah, it was very sensitive in July to those lack of timely summer rains. The oats, on the other hand, they've performed fairly well regardless of seeding date. But sorry, I will note that the earliest seeded oats did end up heading out, and we had to mow them to prevent them from setting seed. So that's definitely another thing to consider when looking at incorporating oats into a cover crop. The peas, we weren't anticipating much of a biomass benefit from the peas here, but given that the land was certified organic, we thought we might potentially see some effect on the next season's cash crop from the peas. Now, looking at cash crop yields the second year, we actually noticed no difference between any of the cover crop types or any of the seeding dates on the cash crop yields. So we didn't see any impact from adding peas to our cover crop blends like we thought we might have. Now, this isn't to say that adding peas to a cover crop blend or that cover crop blends in general aren't beneficial. It's just that it's not something that we can count on to have a single year cash crop yield benefit. There's lots of other potential benefits to explore, like improved soil health or changing soil characteristics, or even livestock nutrition if you're using this as animal feed. Now, just a bit of a recap here for you. Common issues that we've experienced with our cover crop demonstrations on site have been often moisture related. So if we're not getting those timely summer rains anymore, it can definitely impact our crop establishment. And then also weed pressure has continued to be a challenge for us for establishing some of these cover crops. But obviously we cannot control the weather, and we don't really have many herbicide options for a lot of these crops, and especially not when we're planting cover crop blends or when we're planting on certified organic land. So what has worked for us instead is earlier seeding. So often kind of a summer seeding date is recommended for cover crops, for some cover crops in our area. But if we're not getting those timely summer rains anymore, then seeding late spring or early summer can provide a benefit. We just have to keep an eye on the potential for reseeding. Seeding heavier can also help and has helped us in the past. Definitely if we're having really big problems with weed pressure, then higher plant density gives us a better shot at controlling those weeds or competing with them. But I do recognize that's not always an option. The seed can occasionally be pretty pricey. And finally, and probably most importantly, is selecting appropriate species. So there's so much to consider here, like the different cover crop characteristics, if you're wanting cool season or warm season crops, if you're wanting perennials or annuals, and it's also very regionally specific too. So it's really crucial to have that regional demonstration of crops before you invest a lot of your time and money and energy into planting something new. So I'd encourage you to seek out, doesn't even have to be from Agri-ARM necessarily, but find a neighbor that's done something with it before. So a quick thank you to our 2023 partners and sponsors at the CLC. And yeah, thank you all for your attention. I really look forward to questions later on and to hearing some of our other presentations today.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe, for that wonderful presentation here. So like Zoe said, if you have any questions regarding her presentation, you can just pop them into the chat on the side of your control panel there. Next up, we are going to have Lana Shaw. Lana is the research manager at the Southeast Research Farm down in Redverse. So we will hand it over to Lana.
Okay. All right. So
just a sec here, Lana. You'll just have to hit display settings and swap.
Got to do that. Swap again. Okay, do swap. There. Okay, we good?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay. So I was trying to decide what I'm calling my intercropping presentation, and last night when I was making this, I just thought because we can, and that's sort of the theme. We'll do a bit of an overview of some intercropping things that are going on in this region, and then one of my more interesting trials that has happened lately, and some things happening that happened with it. So, okay. So, but when I talk about intercropping, sometimes it's not always that clear. We're developing words to use for some developing and flexible technologies is what I would call them. Cover crops can mean fall seeded cover crops, full season covers. That can mean quite a few things. There's, I'm going to be mainly talking about the mixed grain intercroppings for this part of this presentation, but there's overlaps between cover crops and intercrops. There's this overlap is sometimes called underseeded grasses or clovers, and underseeding would be sort of where you have a planned understory where there's maybe a main grain crop and then something planted underneath that maybe is staying quite short or vegetative. So people get mixed up with terms, so I just want to start this is what I'm talking about on this. So mixed grain intercrops, I like to call it that because that's literally what you're harvesting, is a mixture of grain. And there are quite a few broadly adapted variations. There are some more regional variations or regionally limited variations. There are some that are compatible with very short seasons, so they are good in the north, some that are longer season. Compared to doing a cover crop type of approach to add biodiversity, there's an advantage in that the seed costs don't tend to be a big extra cost with this. We're planting 2 grain species together and there's a separation cost after harvest. So harvesting the grain as a mixture and separating on the basis of usually size, somewhat density, but usually based on size differences. There's potential marketing limitations, and I think maybe in the future growing opportunities, because food companies are very intrigued by this. This was a few years ago on my chickpea flax, which is the main one that I'm going to talk about with this, because it's the combination that I've spent the most time on, that's most developed and has the most obvious advantages. And you can see some of them in the picture. This is flax and chickpeas on the left, and chickpeas growing on its own on the right. On the right, there's a bit more weeds, there's a lot more disease, and maturity-wise, it is still flowering and very green. And we've seen that over years. This is a nice snapshot of why would we do this. So the type of intercropping we're doing, where it's broad acre, mechanized type of intercropping, is a bit not completely unique to North America or the northern prairies, but it's definitely a cool niche that we have at the level of mechanization. There's intercropping is common all over the world, but it tends to be more in use in areas where there's a lot of labor involved and much more people involved in the harvesting and less mechanization of it. So it kind of developed as a co-design collaboration between sort of some rogue farmers and rogue researchers that have just not really knowing the formal ways of doing co-design, just started saying, well, maybe we can figure this out if we're working together. And that has been very interesting and relatively effective. And there are thousands of acres of multiple different intercrops that are being grown commercially for reasons of profitability in the northern prairies. So I did an online survey in early 2020. That was sort of during the start of COVID. It was part of a General Mills project that we were doing, but we were wanting to know more about what's the potential market for this practice, for this idea. And in order to know that, we need to know a little bit more about who is actually doing intercropping currently. So as of the 2019 crop, there was, I had 61 people that were responding. There was quite a lot of them were from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. A few of them were from the US, and I even had a couple of UK people. Most of them were doing the pea canola, chickpea flax, and pea oat were the most frequently used intercrops. Some people had tried a lot of different intercrops. So there's a lot more numbers there than respondents, and that's the reason. Only about 10% of the respondents were actually exclusively certified organic. There would be some that were transitional, some maybe where their operation is partly organic and partly not. Some of that gets a bit complicated. People had tended to assume that this was an organic strategy, but we're finding it's appearing in all sort of demographics of the types of farms. So what do we know about commercial intercrop farms and their production? At that time, most of the median or the most frequent number of grain crops per year that they were producing was 5.5. So they could be doing forages also, but that was, or cover crops, but that for grain crops, it was 5.5. It's 3,000 to 5,000 acres was the most frequent size range. So on the survey, we would say like, is it under 1,000, or there was a few different ranges of sizes of farms, and the 3,000, 5,000 was the largest, which is a not an uncommon medium-sized, good-sized farm in the Northern Prairies. There was 32% that were more than 5,000 acres. Now, that's not how many acres they're intercropping. The mixed grain intercrops per farm in 2019 was 230, I can't see what side this thing, 230 something. And there was 12 farms that had over 1,000 acres intercropped. So we've been doing chickpea flax intercropping trials since 2012, replicated since 2013, continuously. I've been able to scratch together some funding, but in 2019 it was funded as a 3-year project with WGRF and Saskatchewan. And Bill May is the lead on that. There's 5 sites, and that project was just finally completed in 2023 when Saskatoon finished their final site this year. So I don't have, they're working right now on putting all of that data set together. We had a few interesting things that have come out at my site and other sites over the time. But in 2020, we had a interesting pressure cooker of a year that I'm going to show some of the data from that. So this is a little bit of the details of how we did the trial. So we were doing monocrop chickpea seeding rate, keeping that constant for the intercrops, and then we had chickpeas, we had monocrop chickpeas, intercrop chickpeas with flax. There was 3 factors: flax seeding rate, mixed versus alternating rows, and nitrogen fertilizer at 60 kg per hectare or no added nitrogen fertilizer. So CDC, we used glass flax and CDC leader. This is the rates, at least for the kg per hectare varied over the years depending on the seed lot we were using, but this was it was 75, 150, 300, and 600 seeds per square meter was the ranges of seeding rates that we were trying to achieve over years and trying to standardize between years with different seed lots. So in here, this is the yield of both chickpeas and flax. So the orange bars are the chickpeas, and I've stacked the flax on top of them because for me this is a useful visual, and hopefully it is for you too. So at the bottom, a CP means the chickpea mono, and the F in blue is the flax. That's, I don't know, fairly obvious from the colors. The mixed and alternate row. Mixed row was the chickpeas were going down the side banders and the flax was going down the seed shanks. In alternating row, we had, this was 10-inch spacing on a seed master drill. So we'd have chickpeas going down the seed and fertilizer rows. And then in the next row, it was flax going down the seed and fertilizer rows, or seed and fertilizer openers. And you know, that was one of the really interesting questions of this trial is, should we be doing alternating and mixed? And it has, we have to wait for the full analysis of there's actually 19 site years that we're going to be pulling into this analysis. And this is just one of them, but it's one where there was some really interesting things going on because we had 20 inches of rain over the growing season. We had a kind of a ridiculous rainstorm, rainy year in 2022. Nobody would grow chickpeas intentionally with 22 inches of rain, but you don't know how much rain you're going to get, really. And sometimes you get an unreasonable amount of rain. So and this wasn't always that typical where the chickpea monocrop yield was so much lower than the intercropping yield. That only happens on these excessive moisture years. And I have seen it before. We saw it in 2013 and 2014 14 also during some very wet seasons. On dry seasons, the chickpea monocrops tends to yield more chickpeas than the intercrops. And sometimes it yields more total yield than the intercrops. But that was not the case in this year. And this isn't saleable yield, this is just yield, all the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this one was with no added nitrogen, mixed and alternating rows. And this next chart is on the same, it has the same axis on the side. So the highest total yield treatment was mixed rows with quite high rate of flax. And whereas without the nitrogen, it was different. So, but with nitrogen, you get a lot more flax. Now, if you get too much flax in this chickpea flax intercrop, you're not able to thresh the chickpeas sufficiently, so it actually becomes a bit of a risk, pushing the system too much in favor of the flax. So generally, I've been recommending that this is not going on with added nitrogen. Oh, also, so there was statistically significant factors for chickpea yield. The statistically significant factors for chickpea yield was flax seeding rate, the nitrogen fertility rate, and then there was an interaction with flax seeding rate and the row type, which I'll delve into when we actually get this all published. We'll be able to have that all laid out. So all of those 19 site years, there was 15 from this project, and then 4 site years from some preliminary work that we had done that will be getting published hopefully soon. There was definitely some complicated interactions in 2022. The nitrogen fertilizer reduced chickpea yield about 30% overall, but it did increase flax yield. Surprisingly, it also increased disease in the chickpeas, which is, I think, partly why we were seeing that reduction in chickpea yield. And it was very obvious visually in the field that was going on. I think like it was just a lot of lush growth with huge amounts of moisture, and the disease pressure was just seemed quite a bit higher where that nitrogen fertilizer was applied. So the land equivalency ratios are really high because of a near crop failure in the chickpea monocrops. That we didn't even get into the maturity differences, which were enormous, the quality differences, which will also be really large, but the quality would line up fairly well with that yield as well. That the treatments that had high yield generally were having larger seed size and higher quality, but we haven't delved into all that data sufficiently yet. So a couple of years ago, I pulled in some of the previous trials that were done, and some that I'd been involved in with the other collaborators, and then and some of the other Agri-ARM research farms, and pulled in some of the data sets out of Carrington in North Dakota and also Williston, and was comparing what I've been recommending as the way to do this chickpea flax, which is a sort of a moderate rate of flax of 10 to 15 pounds per acre of flax and mixed rows. And so we compared that kind of a treatment to the monocrop. And this is for chickpea disease severity. And sometimes there was no really big difference, but when there was quite a lot of disease severity, we were always seeing reductions in the disease severity with intercropping compared to monocrops. So I took those numbers, and because I like to be able to sort of visualize things, I turned each of those site years into a blue dot. And if they would be lying at the red line, if the disease was equal between intercrops and monocrops. And if the intercrops made the disease worse, it would be above the red line. We never had a year where the intercrops made the disease worse, of those ones that I put in. Now for 2022, there may have been some individual treatments that, or certain individual plots that were worse than individual monocrop plots, but overall we still haven't seen a situation where the intercropping was making the disease worse. The data set for 2022 was quite variable and messy, so we don't have quite as much statistical differences showing up on disease as I would like, even though disease was tremendous. It was very patchy also. And we're dealing with 10-foot wide plots, so it was spreading from one plot to another quite readily. So Bill May is the lead on this, and these are some of the main people that were involved. Steve Shirtliff got left off this list, but he should be on here also with his technical staff. And then Mike Osley and Claire Keane, WGRF, ADF, and Sask Flax were part of that. And so that was just a snippet of some of the research that has been done. There's been a lot done over the last few years, and we've got a big push on getting that into the peer review papers right now. So expect to see quite a few of those landing in journals in the next 12 months, I would say, or even 6 months.
Awesome. Alrighty. Thank you, Lana, for the presentation. We'll have you stay on for our question panel. But next up, we're going to be going to our next speaker here, which is Gursahib Singh. So Gursahib is the research director for irrigation research and the demonstration program at the Irrigation Crop Diversification Corporation in Outlook. And that is why we like acronyms like ICDC. So we'll let you take her away there, Gursahib.
Ellie, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, it all looks good on my end.
Okay, I lost my presentation. Just a moment. Okay, yeah, here.
Perfect. Everything looks good here.
Okay, thank you, Ellie, for the introduction, and welcome, guys. So today we'll be talking about some of the research projects that are done or are finished at ICDC and then are continuing on dry bean especially. Being an irrigated site, I get to work with novelty crops such as dry bean, and I like that. That's one of the reasons I like being at ICDC. We are not limited to just the conventional crops, but we do get to try many other new crops as well. So for today, I will be highlighting 3 projects. 2 of them are done. They were funded by SFP and ADF, and then we have an ongoing project that started last year. So I will be just highlighting the preliminary results for that trial. Starting with, we all know about the Saskatchewan crops, and we know about dry beans as well. But just to give a brief update, most of the dry beans they are grown under irrigation in Saskatchewan. Dry beans are gaining popularity under dryland as well. With the new varieties that are coming from the CDC program, they are bred for the narrow production system, especially dryland conditions. So that's why we're seeing dry beans in dryland condition as well. Under irrigation, the acres have been really constant over the last few years, and it ranges between 8 to 12% of the total irrigated acres in Saskatchewan. And most of the dry bean acres are within the Lake Diefenbach development area. Dry beans, it's another option, pulse crop option that could be included into our crop rotation. And some of the advantages that dry bean comes with is it's less prone to phenomyces as compared to peas and lentils, especially under irrigation, where phenomyces like moisture is not limited, and phenomyces likes moisture, and it do get really aggressive under irrigation. So dry bean can be a good option to include in the crop rotation. And as I mentioned previously, under irrigation, it's mainly wide row production system, which means 30 centimeter, 30-inch spacing, whereas under narrow row production system, it's 10-inch row spacing. So the first project we did, it was focused on tillage and seeding date. So the idea was dry bean being an apical germination crop. By apical, I mean that both soybean and dry bean, they push the cotyledon out of the ground when they emerge. And they're very prone. In the newly emerged plant, it's very prone to frost damage. So germination, the idea was to see if tillage or seeding day would enhance the germination efficacy and the plants being more vigorous. Dry beans, they usually like warm soil temperature. 15 to 16 is ideal, and if the temperature below 12 degrees Celsius, the plants, they are not very vigorous. They would sit at the same growth stage for a few days until they get a heat shock, and then they will start growing again. Under irrigation, tillage, it's a common practice. It's used. The main goal of tillage, the big one, is the weed management, and then also the idea is the soil warms quickly with tillage, and that benefits the emergence and the germination. So the knowledge gap was there wasn't tillage or seeding date study done for the dry land or narrow production system. So we were just looking at a few of the things to address through this study. So coming to the objective or the main goal of the project, our idea was to look at the stubble management, which was the tillage treatment and seeding date, how that would impact the soil warming, the plant emergence, plant stand, diseases, especially under irrigation, and then with the narrow row too, the number of plants per square meter are higher as compared to wide row. And then also at the harvestability, under dry land, under irrigation, the dry beans are normally undercut and then combined, whereas under narrow production system, the dry beans are direct combined. And the idea was to see if seeding date or stubble management would have any impact on the harvestability of the dry beans. This project started in 2021, and it completed this last year, and I just submitted the final report for this. This was mainly focused on single dry bean market class, the black beans. So the variety we used was CDC Blackstrap. So as mentioned, this was for the narrow production system. This project was funded by SFP through the Sustainable CAP program. For the treatment, we were looking at 3 tillage treatment, which was heavy tillage, medium tillage, and no tillage. I just have a video here to show you what a heavy tillage. So this is just to give you an idea what heavy tillage looked like. We went with the rototiller on our small plots, and then they were harrow packed. For the medium tillage, you can see in the photo up on the right-hand side, it's a medium tillage plot, and you can still see some stubbles. The plots were cultivated in this case, and then we had a no tillage treatment. The dry beans were direct seeded into the stubbles. Our second factor was seeding date. Normally, the dry beans are seeded after the May long weekend, towards the last week of May. This case, we were trying 3 seeding dates, May 10, May 21st, and June 1st. So it was a 10-day difference between each of the seeding date. Coming to the results, what we saw was for the soil warming, that was one of the data or factor we were looking at. We didn't saw any tillage treatment effect on soil warming because like the tillage, we were just disturbing the upper 3 or 4 inches of the ground, and the soil to this depth, it warms quickly and it cools quickly. And even though throughout this study, our spring had a lot of temperature fluctuations, So depending upon the seeding day, we could have temperature which was high enough or above 15 degrees Celsius, but there were few occasions when our temperature was like below 10 degrees. So it varied a lot throughout the 3 years of the study, but in overall, when I did the analysis, there wasn't any tillage treatment effect. Seeding date with the seeding date, June 1st, we know that the weather temperature would be higher than the initial seeding date, and that affected the soil temperature as well. So seeding date, there was a positive response, and June 1st had higher soil temperature or temperatures above 15 degrees Celsius. Tillage and seeding date interaction, again, it wasn't significant. Day to emergence, tillage again, there wasn't any difference to days in emergence between the 3 seeding dates. Between the 3 seeding dates, again, June 1st plants took less amount to cut out of the ground as compared to May 10 and May 21. May 10 and May 21, they had similar number of days to emergence. And lastly, tillage and seeding date again didn't have interaction for days to emergence. One of the thing, it wasn't an objective for this study, but me being a pathologist, I was just observing how disease would be impacted by the tillage treatment and then the seed treatment. Both the 3 years of the study, the temperature was high, even though we were irrigating these plots regularly, but there wasn't much humidity, and we didn't saw any disease, not even bacterial bleed, bacterial blight or white mold. So the pressure was really low. So it's hard to tell if tillage or seeding date had any impact on diseases. Pod clearance or harvestability, again, tillage treatment, the effect remains insignificant. Seeding date, what we saw was June 1st plant, the height was, they were taller than May 21st and May 10 seeded plants or plots. And with the higher or the taller plants, the lower pod, the height of the lower pod was even higher, and if we direct combine it, we won't be losing seed in this case. So June 1st was effective and helping us with the pod clearance. And again, tillage and seeding date interaction was non-significant for pod clearance. Coming to the last parameter, which was yield. So we saw a tillage benefit in terms of yield. Heavy tillage plots had better yield as compared to mid tillage and no tillage. And similarly, as we delayed the seeding date to June 1st, the yield of the dry beans, in this case blackstrap variety, increased. And there was no interaction again for the tillage and seeding dates. So what we concluded in this study was we saw a positive influence of tillage on the dry bean yield, but I just want to highlight and remind everyone that tillage, it doesn't follow under our best management practices as we are moving away or following the no-till practices. And this is just a 3-year study. We don't know how the long-term impact of the tillage, how it would affect our soil, our environment. So it's really hard to comment on this if tillage should be adopted in long term. But for this project, based on our 3-year data, we saw a positive influence on yield. And the speculation is with tillage, the ground was soft. There was a better seed to soil contact, and possibly there would be a better root development as well in the heavy tillage. Seeding date, we saw as we delayed the seeding date to June 1st, the seed yield increased for blackstrap. For diseases, there wasn't enough disease pressure, so we don't have any relation, or it's hard to comment on the relationship between tillage, seeding date, and diseases. And the soil temperature dynamic, the first one, soil warming. So there was no significant effect of temperature on soil warming, but we saw a positive trend for seeding date. Moving forward to our next study. So this study was completed last year in 2022, and I've talked about this study a few times, but I thought it would be a good idea to remind everyone again before we start seeding again. So for this study, we were focused on the fertilizer nitrogen fertilizer rates, what rate should be applied, or what response right, or what kind of response do we get from different fertilizer rates. So dry beans all over, as compared to other pulse crops, they are poor biological and fixation crop or legume. And if you look at the graph on the right hand side, you can get an idea, like alfalfa, fava beans, they can fix all the nitrogen they need in the growing period. But for dry bean, the yellow part and the green part, it's like they can fix half of their requirement, and then you have to provide half with the supplemental fertilizers. Dry bean inoculants, they're not many fertilizers available, and they are not very commercially beneficial as well, I would say. In this case, there was a study that was done at different Agri-ARM side, and ICDC was leading that side. That was focused on whether you should inoculate on fertigate or fertilize your dry beans. And what we saw was, or what Gary saw in this study was, inoculations, there wasn't any yield response, or there wasn't any agronomic benefits of using inoculants. Whereas applying nitrogen fertilizer, it benefited the dry beans and increased the yield and height. So the dry bean and fertilizer rates in Saskatchewan. So there's just an anecdotal claim for Saskatchewan, because I couldn't find a research that's backing this hypothesis that in Saskatchewan, the recommended rate for dry bean is, if you apply 80 pounds, the total nitrogen rate should be 80 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre. That's through the supplemental fertilizer and soil test for the upper 2 feet. For Alberta, so this is based on research. For Alberta, the recommended rates for dry bean, it's from 80 to 100 pounds per acre. Again, that's for fertilizer and then soil available. And for Manitoba, again, this research is old, but they're still following these guidelines, and the recommended rates are from 90 pounds per acre of nitrogen fertilizers. They don't have they don't include the available soil nitrogen. For North Dakota, these are the new recommendations that came in 2023, and according to new recommendations, you're supposed to apply 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. This is total nitrogen that include fertilizer and soil test N, and this 150 pounds of N per acre. Again, it's recommended that you do that in split applications. So based on this, we initiated a study at ICDC, and we were just focused on one market class, pinto beans, and that was done under wide row production system under irrigation. We were also looking at which fertilizer products should be used when it comes to nitrogen, whether we should use enhanced efficacy products or bare urea. The study started in 2019, but due to COVID year, we had to stop for a year in 2020 and then resumed in 2021 and 2022 and concluded at the start of 2023. Two fertilizer products we used was commercial urea and ESN, and fertilizer rates, that is soil and fertilizer, and it started from 30 till 150, and this was an increment of 30 kg N per hectare for the 5 treatments. This again, we used a pinto bean variety, which was White Mountain 3. The seeding rate, again, we followed the recommendation toward the last week of May. Wide row production, and under wide row production, we had to undercut and then combine the plots. Based on our soil test results, so this side, we had 9 site years of data for this one, and based on the 9 site years, our average soil available nitrogen for the first 0 to 30 centimeter or 12 inches, it was 30 kg N per hectare, and for 60 centimeter or the next feed, it was 58 kg N per hectare. Coming to results, what we saw was there was a marginal yield gain for the first 3 treatment from 30 kg till 90 kg. And dry beans, they didn't start responding significantly until we added like 1 kg of nitrogen. And again, it flattened from 120 kg to 150 kg of N per hectare. So the first significant increment was at 120, and when I compared the 120 kg N to the control, it was 11% yield gain, and then it flattened. Between the two products, what we saw was ESN had benefits, and we saw that through our yield, dry bean yield over urea. Biomass, again, the first 3 treatments, 30 kg and 60 kg and 90 kg, there wasn't any significant difference. And we saw that significant gain when we added 120 kg and per hectare. And again, it dropped at 150. Between the two fertilizer products, again, ESN was better as compared to urea. Going through the tissue and uptake, again, we saw the same story. Control had even better tissue and uptake as compared to the first 4, and then we saw some gain when we went to 150 kg N treatment. Based on the two fertilizer products, there wasn't any difference. Both urea and ESN dry bean had equal amount of tissue and uptake. Looking at the story for the total N uptake, what we saw was the control had better N uptake as compared to the first 3 treatments, 30, 60, and 90. And then we saw a slope at 120, and then it dropped slightly at 150. Looking at this, when I was doing analysis for this, it didn't make sense to me. Like the background soil nitrogen, available nitrogen for the first 12 inches, it averaged at 30 kg N per hectare, and for the control here, you can see it's close to 90. So it was hard to comment how, even though we didn't apply any product and nitrogen products, how there's 90 kg of tissue and uptake. And when building on this story, what we found was these White Mountain 3 variety, the pinto bean variety we used, was when we looked at the roots for this in all the 3 years, it had nodules present on the roots, and when we crushed the nodules, they were pinkish, and that means they were actively fixing nitrogen. And that made sense that why that control plot, even there was no fertilizer applied, the background soil nitrogen was very low, and there was still a lot of tissue and uptake. This happened in 2021. This means that the indigenous rhizobium here in Saskatchewan or in our ground, it was helping pinto beans fixing nitrogen, and they were actively fixing nitrogen. This ground where we had this trial in 2021, it didn't have any history of dry bean. This was the first time we had dry bean on this site, so it was really hard how, even though we didn't apply any inoculant in the past, how dry beans were actively fixing nitrogen, or there was a really good nodule formation, as you can see in the photo on the right-hand side. This happened again in 2022. Again, this field didn't have history as well. But one thing we found was the control plot had better nodule formation as compared to the fertilized. So up here in the slides, you can see that the control plot on the left-hand side, there are bigger and more nodules as compared to the fertilized plots. So at the end of this study, what we concluded was dry beans, especially pinto beans, they failed to respond to our fertilizer rates until we applied 120 kg N per hectare. Below that, we didn't saw any response. The unfertilized White Mountain 3 uninoculated plots, they formed a symbiosis with the indigenous rhizobia, and they were actively fixing nitrogen. and the biological and fixation in control plot was sufficient to optimize the seed yield as compared to the fertilized treatment. And at the end, our recommendation for pinto dry beans, we came up that if we apply 70 to 90 kg N per hectare of supplemental nitrogen, that includes the fertilizer and the soil test, that would be enough. That would be enough for the requirement of the dry beans. But this is just in case of White Mountain 3. We don't know how black beans and other classes of dry bean would respond to the fertilizer rates. There's been ongoing study, and some completed in Manitoba as well. They saw similar results. Dry beans in pinto case, they were actively fixing nitrogen and they were not responding, whereas black bean had a different story. So at the end of this, our recommendation for especially pinto bean is if the soil available and for supplemental fertilizer, and if that equals to 60 to 80 pounds per acre of nitrogen, that should be sufficient to meet the requirement of pinto beans. And lastly, I would just touch on this study, as these are just the preliminary results for this study. This study was funded through SFP, and I have Morgan Cote from the Irrigation Outlook, Ministry of Agriculture Outlook Office, who is leading this project, and ICDC is a contractor. For this one, we are looking at the phosphorus fertilizer rate for irrigated dry beans. We are looking at 2 market class. Learned from the previous project, I thought it's better to include 2 dry bean class rather than just focusing on 1. So we have 2 dry bean class, black beans and pinto beans. Our fertilizer rates, we have different fertilizer rates and fertilizer placements. So we're comparing seed place to side band. Our fertilizer rates for seed placed are 15, 30, and 45. For side band, we went over that 45 and we added additional treatment of 60 kg actual P2O5 per hectare. And based on our first year result, what we saw was for the seed placed had advantage over side banded, and between the seed placed application, 30 kg P2O5 per hectare, we saw an advantage, and after going to 45, the yield dropped. This is because the number of plants per square meter dropped for 45 treatment. So these are just the preliminary results. This study is going to continue for the next 2 years, and maybe by the end, I'm hopeful at the end of the 3rd year, we would have some good results and new recommendations for dry beans. With this, I would like to acknowledge our funding from Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture through the CAP program and the new Sustainable CAP program. I would like to acknowledge all the ministry staffs who have helped us on the SFP projects and ADF projects. Also acknowledge the effort and labor, time, hard work put by ICDC staff and the CSIDC staff, and we rely heavily on our summer students. And these projects, they had a lot of biomassing, sample grinding, so students really helped us throughout these projects, and I'd like to acknowledge their time. With that, I will end my presentation and look forward to questions at the end of this webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Gersahib, for the presentation. So next up, we have our final speaker, last but definitely not least, Brian Nybo. So Brian is the manager at the Wheatland Conservation Area, which is located in Swift Current. So we can see your presentation here, Brian, and I will pass it over to you.
And you can hear me well too?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to talk about forage options to include in a cropping rotation. And my my outline here, I'll get her going here. My project outline, I'm going to first talk about some current issues that are facing producers these days, and how forages in rotation can help with that. And then after that, I'm going to talk about a trial that we started in 2023. We're halfway through that project. It's selecting forage options to consider in a rotation. So I'll talk about fall dormancy ratings, termination methods, and just touch on economics. So demonstrating forage options and cropping rotations. This is a project that was funded through ADOPT through the Ministry of Agriculture. And this, like any other project, kind of has to start with an issue, and we get those ideas from producers and researchers and industry. So what are some of the agronomic issues that we are currently facing these days? Well, there's herbicide resistant weeds. This can be a result from short rotations. There's using same herbicides. They're not rotating herbicide groups to slow down resistance. Other issues are nutrient inefficiencies. So maybe underutilizing soil tests and practicing less than ideal fertilizer strategies. Other reasons might be rotations that are heavily dependent on fertilizer N. We can also lose nutrients through leaching, volatilization, and denitrification. There's soil health issues, and that could be a result from narrow rotations that are detrimental to soil health and organic matter, and it results in like poor soil structure, compaction, poor infiltration, and poor water holding capacity. Disease resistance, that's another issue that we're facing. And again, it's mostly caused by tight rotations and using a crop that is a common host for the disease. And also utilizing fungicides that have similar mode of actions and not rotating fungicides. Next, there's soil salinity has been a big issue, and that's traditionally caused by tillage. And what's happening there is we're underutilizing the root zone soil moisture. We're getting leaching in early spring when those annual crops are quite small, and that's contributing to water tables and saline seeps. So what are we doing about all these problems? Well, currently we're rotating our herbicide groups, and we're stacking herbicides to slow down resistance. We're utilizing 4R practices to maximize nutrient efficiencies, and we're utilizing a wide range of crops in our rotations to improve soil health. Also, we're rotating our fungicide groups, and we're looking at optimizing application timing. We're doing that quite well. And we're exploring new and novel pulse crops to include in our rotations for disease resistance. We're also practicing no-till, and we're seeding salt-tolerant crops and permanent forages in and around saline areas. So all these practices are extremely important, and they're highly recommended practices that we're using and we should continue to use. However, with these issues ever evolving, it just seems like we're always trying to catch up to the changes. So the more tools we have available to us to supplement what we already have, the better. And what are some of these other tools? Well, one main one is including forages in a rotation. So I talked about all these individual strategies to manage like an individual issue, but forages in rotation is a single management strategy to help us manage multiple issues like I've been talking about with weed and disease resistance and so forth. And this practice should be used in conjunction or in combination with all our other management tools that we're already using. So forages in rotation can delay herbicide resistance by extending your rotations and giving your herbicides a break. So rather than spraying the same herbicide every other year, you can limit your applications to 4 to 5 years, depending on how long that forage is in your rotation. Practicing forages in rotation can improve nutrient efficiencies. As Grishib had mentioned there before, a good alfalfa stand can fix up to 300 pounds of nitrogen a year per acre. And it also is deep-rooted. The alfalfas are deep-rooted, so they can scavenge lost or leached nutrients from depth. And then upon termination of the forages, you can add organic matter and nutrients from the above and the below ground plant biomass. Forages in rotation also can improve soil health. The more diverse the rotation, the more diverse is your soil microflora, and the more healthier your soil is. And then also the deep root alfalfas can improve water infiltration, soil structure, and compaction. Forages in rotation also can delay fungicide resistance, so it reduces your reliance on fungicides by removing that susceptible host out of that disease triangle equation, and disease is unable to manifest itself in your crop. And also forages in rotation can manage soil salinity and erosion by adding these perennial forages up in your recharge areas. You've got a nicely developed root system already in your forages, and that will use that moisture before it has a chance to percolate down through the soil zones and picking up salts and contributing to seeps. So this is just a quick summary of the benefits of forages in rotation, but those are agronomic benefits. Some other benefits might be you can spread the workload away from the busy seeding and harvest seasons associated with annual crops. And you can take the workload off some of your big equipment, your combines and your tractors and your sprayers that are used in annual cropping by taking those acres out of production for a few years and moving into a forage in your rotation. So the decisions that we make going into and coming out of a forage phase of the rotation can impact profitability of that rotation. So that's where we get into the trial that we started in 2023. It's a 2-year project, and it's done at Swift Current and Outlook. And we're looking at optimizing these forage selections to be included into a rotation. And we're looking at improving the profitability of the forages and rotations. So one of the questions asked is, should we use the same forage options as we would a long-term forage stand? So in this trial, we're selecting our forage options based on fall dormancy. And fall dormancy it's an FD rating. It's a measure of how much the alfalfa will regrow in the fall after cutting. So for example, an alfalfa with an FD rating of 1 will grow less after cutting, and instead will stockpile that energy and store it into the roots for winter survival. On the other hand, alfalfa with an FD rating of 5, for example, it will exhibit a lot more fall growth, and producers can maybe push that envelope on a later, more productive second cut. And that would be at the expense of stockpiling energy. So people do say, well, why do I want to cut my alfalfa late in the fall if it's going to hurt the longevity of my stand? And with a forage in rotation, we're not really concerned about the longevity of the stand, because it's only going to be in that rotation for 2 or 3 years anyways before you move back into an annual crop. So this is a treatment list that we put together for the trial. It looks at 2 alfalfas, one with an FD rating of 2, a Sidewinder alfalfa, and the other Ultima alfalfa with an FD rating of 4.4. We also wanted to include a clover in there just for comparison purposes. And then we added some mixes in there as well. And the reason we added the mixes in there is to increase the production in that year of establishment, because alfalfas alone are traditionally low producers in that year of establishment. So to increase profitability, we want to increase production in that first year. So we added a brome grass, a wild rye, field pea, pronghorn triticale, and the forage barley as to wind up the treatments. Our data collection, we're just finished the first year of this trial, so we've got our establishment data and biomass yield in our first year, and we're moving into the 2024 season. We'll be looking at the overall winter establishment and looking at the year 2 biomass as well. We'll look at forage quality, and we'll touch on economics as well. So this is just a few pictures of our trials, our treatments. This was done 30 days after the final cut. And it's just to show that we did have a good establishment, even though we did go through quite a dry year. All the plants are there moving into 2024. And so we should be able to get some good numbers for establishment or for production in our next year here. But just to look at our last year's biomass yields, we weren't expecting huge yields because it is the year of establishment, but we did notice our mixtures, like we expected, did increase production. So hopefully that will contribute to profitability. We did have hail in Swift Current on our trials. This isn't the alfalfa trial, but this was close by as a barley trial that we had. So the hail was pretty significant. So that had an impact on yields at Swift Current as well. At Outlook, yields were a little bit better. They avoided the hail, and but still fairly low, just because it was the year of establishment and not a full production year. So the hail damage at Swift Current impacted yields, and we weren't expecting high yields in the year of establishment anyways. However, on the slide before, we saw that we had a good stand, a good establishment, so we'll have to look at our 2024 yields before we can get a real good economic picture of these forages in rotation. The other thing we wanted to look at was this fall regrowth, or this FD rating, and we have our two alfalfas here. We have the Sidewinder, the FD rating of 2, and the Ultima FD of 4.4. And you can see 30 days after cutting in the fall, the Sidewinder was storing energy in the roots and not putting that energy towards top growth. And we saw regrowth of about 4 inches there, as opposed to the Ultima, it's 8 to 10 inches, so quite a bit more fall regrowth at the expense of storing that energy in the roots. So the question is, will we get more production in that second year, that second cut from the Ultima? And hopefully that's the case, and that will contribute to the profitability of these forages in rotation. The other part of the trial was termination, or transitioning back into annual forages. And we're going to do this in 2 different ways. We're going to do a chemical termination of the forages and a mechanical termination. So we're going to cut our plots in half. We're going to till half, and we're going to use chemical termination methods on the second half. So these termination strategies should be based on plant pathology. So if you're going to till, you should target the stage when that plant is the weakest, and that's after that last cut, when you've removed all that photosynthetic material off as yield, and the plant is trying to regrow. It's at its weakest. That's when you hit it with the tillage. As opposed to if you're using a herbicide, you want to target the stage when the plant is actively growing. So that's before you do your last cut. So in this trial, we're going to use glyphosate 3 to 7 days prior to the final cut, and that'll give that glyphosate a chance to translocate down into the root zone where it's effective, and before we're able to, and then we'll remove the forage production after that. So one caution here: if it's dry in the fall, which often it is, that herbicide intake might be a little inadequate in the fall. So you may have to do a spring glyphosate at maybe a 2,4-D or a dicamba mix, and do that after the alfalfa has broke dormancy, when it starts to grow again, and you'll get good effects there. Just the caution: if you use 2,4-D or dicamba, your recropping options are almost limited to cereals, which cereals is a good option after a forage anyways in your rotation. So we looked at our forage options to optimize revenue. We looked at efficiently moving in and out of the forage phase of the rotation. But I want to focus mostly on the cost to producer Or what are the penalties associated with herbicide and disease resistance, soil issues, soil health and salinity, fertilizer inefficiencies, things like that. And this comes in the form of lower grain yields, reduced grain quality, higher input costs, increased dockage, and reduced land values. I'd like to refer to a website I found, Manage Resistance Now, and it's a good resource, and it discusses the economics of resistance. And it says herbicide resistance alone is estimated to cost producers $1.1 to $1.5 billion a year in increased herbicide use, decreased yield, and quality. And that's a big number. So this somehow we have to work this or factor this into our final equation in economics and go from there. Also, it says resistance management can reduce profit in the first year, but increase profits in the second year and up to 18 years subsequent to that. So just with that, I'd like to summarize by saying it is a challenge sometimes keeping up with the ever-changing issues in agriculture, and producers are doing a good job with the tools that they have available to them, but introducing a forage into the rotation is just another good management tool and might be a good fit for some producers. So I would suggest if you want to try this, start small, maybe start with some lower quality marginal lands or some of your problem areas. So with that, I'd like to thank my staff, and I'd like to thank the ADOPT program, the Sask Ministry of Agriculture, for funding this project. And I think we've got time for some questions.
Alrighty, thank you, Brian, for that presentation. So at this point, I'm going to ask all the speakers to turn on your webcams here, and we're going to jump into questions. It looks like at some point we unfortunately lost Lana, but we still have lots of questions for the rest of you here, so we'll get started. Alrighty, so first off, for Zoe, what is the biggest benefit to using a cover crop, and how do I decide what to grow?
Biggest benefit, that's kind of a hard question to answer. I'd say it's really dependent on your goals. A lot of benefits are just like weed management, moisture retention. You can till it in for some added nutrients. Yeah, that's kind of a hard one to answer. It's a little bit variable depending on what your goal is and what your production system looks like. In terms of what to start with, I mean, everything that I've encountered recommends starting small. Like, don't go into it with like a 15 species blend right off the bat in a large area, kind of echoing what Brian said. Take some marginal acres that you're not really using, try something simple, even just throw some oats in there and go from there, increase later on. For determining species that work for you, you can reach out to your local Agri-ARM site and see if they've done anything recently on that, or even just finding local producer groups or neighbors that have tried things as well is always a great resource to see how it works down in your region.
Awesome. No, I think you nailed that answer, Zoe. It's really dependent on what you're looking for when you're looking at the biggest benefit you're getting from it. But yeah, that is, again, a great plug to look for local research, guys. There's lots of available through these sites, so definitely check it out and reach out to your local one. Next up, for Gersahib, what is the target yield with the 70 to 90 kilograms total N per hectare for dry bean?
So our average dry bean yields for irrigated under the Lake Different area is about like 3,000 pounds per acre, and we were achieving that with 70 to 90.
Awesome. Thank you.
The control was slightly lower in my graphs. It was close to 27 to 28. For that additional 300, 400 pounds, we can achieve that through that additional fertilizer.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Brian, if I'm solely a grain farmer and haven't grown forages before, what is the best way I can approach estimating the return I'll get on a forage crop?
Yeah, that's a good question. Getting into forages isn't always easy. It requires some additional machinery, but as I mentioned, you are taking annual crop acres out of production for a few years, so you're taking a load off some of your other equipment as well. And equipment these days is astronomical. How much you know, a four-wheel drive tractor or combine or a sprayer is going up in price. It's the last 5 years, it's just been crazy. So this all has to be kind of factored into economics. It's a tough question that's kind of hard to answer, but like I said, just try to maybe start small. Or if you have someone that can seed that, custom seed it, or you know, have someone that you sell your hay standing, for instance, something like that might help recover some of the costs of equipment and some of the difficulties that are involved with getting in and out of forages. But the trial that we did here it's trying to increase the profitability of a forage practice or of a management practice that I think is highly underused, and go from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. All right, next up I have Zoe again. What soil zone do you think tillage radish works best in?
I can't speak to what it looks like in other areas, but we're in the black soil zone in Prince Albert, and it did really well for us. So yeah, I'm unfortunately not too well versed on the specifics of how tillage radish performs in other regions, but yeah, like I said, black soil zone, it did well for us.
Brian and Gersahip, have you guys ever had the tillage radish in?
Yeah, we have in the past with limited success or variable success, I would say. Some years, you know, you can take 2 steps before you get to another tillage radish in your trials, and other years it's pretty decent. We did notice there was some issues with shading or shadowing and competing for sunlight in some of the mixtures that we had. But yeah, it's been a little bit variable. The ones that we do have established, they grow quite big. They're quite a nice looking. You know, you can tell that it's doing the job it's supposed to be doing. Just we need to maybe increase our establishment a little bit down here in Swift Current.
Yeah, for me, like I've stayed away from the forages with my background, but Gary did do some project in the past, and I'm not familiar with the results, but I can look back if someone is interested for Outlook region.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Alrighty. Next up, I have for Zoe. How much work do you guys do with organic production, and do all the Agri-ARM sites have the ability to do organic research?
Yeah, so for us, it's variable year to year depending on what project funding we get. Anywhere from kind of 0 to 3 or 4 maybe organic projects. We're really fortunate our next door neighbor in Prince Albert is an organic farmer, so we're able to collaborate with him that way. I'm not sure of any other Agri-ARM sites that have the ability to do organic research. I don't know if Brian or Gersahib knows more than me, but yeah, we're just really fortunate to have a neighbor close by that is organic.
Yeah, go ahead, Gersh.
Yeah, we haven't done anything in Outlook. Yeah, irrigation, we look for the top yield, so that's why we haven't done anything organic under irrigation.
The land that we have in Swift Current is not certified organic. However, we do some organic trials. They're not really true organic trials, but we do the practices. We run the trial down here as if it was, and so we contribute that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it's you guys are in a lucky position up here at the CLC to like have that neighbor down the road that you can do on organic land. All right, I see Lana has joined us. Welcome back, Lana. Next question I have is for Gersahib again. So if you were suggesting to producers best practices for the dry bean project you were talking about, what tillage methods and seeding dates would you choose?
Yeah, I will be more recommending the seeding dates rather than tillage. Again, it doesn't align with our best management practices, and as we are moving towards sustainability, I won't recommend tillage, but we saw the similar advantage with the seeding date. We are seeding dry beans later in May and delaying it till early June. We saw that advantage. So between last week of May to the first week of June, I think that's what farmers should target for when it's come to seeding date. Yeah, tillage, it does help. It's a normal practice under wide row with the weed management and less herbicide options, and people are doing it, and they do, and it comes with the cost as well. And with the irrigation, we can cover the cost for tillage, but under dryland or narrow, like we haven't done any economics on that, so it's really hard to comment on that part.
It's a coincidence. That's actually what I did my master's degree on, was
Oh.
no-till dry beans on dry land. It wasn't a very good project. It was mostly a weed trial. It wasn't an unintended weed trial, but yeah, it's been a question for a little while.
Okay.
Awesome. Alrighty, guys. Next up, I have a question for Alana. So what is the biggest hurdle that producers experience when they try to intercrop for the first time?
Maybe the most common problem area is lining up maturity between the two crops, or the lack of coinciding maturity, because it is somewhat variable based on weather conditions. You're trying to use varieties and various other management to try to make it match as well as possible, but that's off sometimes when it's a fairly thorny problem. It can be. It's not all the time, but it can be tricky to deal with.
Perfect. And the other question we have for you, Lana, is from your experience, what is your favorite intercrop combination to do?
I don't know. Whichever one I'm standing in at the moment. It's the chickpea flax one is kind of hard to beat. It's just that dramatic. And on like this in 2022, when we had all this craziness going on, like just going and walking out there was really neat to see all the different things going on, and the quality and disease and yield benefits going on, and with how high stakes the chickpeas are as like a high risk crop. I like that it's two relatively high value food crops, and we're figuring out how to grow them together. And yeah, so it's still the favorite.
And you're growing
Awesome.
your chickpeas in non-traditional chickpea growing areas too, so that's big as well.
Yeah, because I can't grow decent chickpeas in redvers, but I can intercrop some pretty decent chickpeas in redvers. Like monocrop, this is not chickpea country at all. I'm completely crazy for growing chickpeas here. But intercropping changes the calculation.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty. I have one last question, and it's for Brian. This is my own question, Brian. But with the forages projects you were talking about, you were also talking a lot about herbicide resistance and the management of that. Here down in Swift Current country, which is like kochia and grasshoppers, with the herbicide resistance, have you seen farmers trying, like obviously forages is an option, have you seen them trying some other options, or do you have any that you're interested in looking more into at the farm?
Yeah, there's other options that producers are using. Of course, rotating your herbicide groups, and the herbicide stacking, I think, is something that producers down here are starting to get into, And I think they've had some success with that, but I think we'll be doing a lot more work with that. We've got some work that we're going to be doing next year and in following years with kochia and resistance, and just trying to solve that kochia problem in this area. That'll be huge for this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be looking at a lot of those options that aren't necessarily chemical in nature. I know I've heard a lot more talk about harvest weed seed control and options there and that kind of thing. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get some new technology adopted that'll help us sort out that issue before it eats us for lunch. But with that, guys, that is all the questions that I have today. So at this time, I'm just going to thank you all for hopping on here and giving those presentations. It's super valuable information, and I know the audience loves it. So thank you guys for coming on today. At this point, we're going to stop recording here, and I will